Bad morning, everybody. Winning news if you wanted to start your day off with disappointing, irritating, or otherwise negative news and just hearing generally negative things, you're in the right place. Today is October 8th, 2018. Thank you to our sponsor, Brave Browser. If you want a less invasive browsing experience, and if you want to get away from some of the major companies out there that are invading your privacy, every time you use their services, check out Brave Browser. And thanks to them for sponsoring the show. And Bad More News is also on Patreon. Thanks to anybody who is supporting us on Patreon or is considering doing that. Thanks a lot. So I just will start with getting the Kavanaugh thing out of the way, I guess, for today. Um, Over the weekend on Saturday, I guess, he was confirmed as the next Supreme Court justice. And of course, there were protests and all the predictable complaints from the liberal side. Um, I wasn't really paying too much attention, to be honest, with about what they have going on right now, because I'm pretty tired of the whole story. So hopefully, I won't have to talk about it too much more, because it is pretty irritating and it's not something I really enjoyed watching. It was just more theater, and it was somewhat entertaining at times, but also just really depressing to watch people become that ridiculous. So, uh, but yeah, so he was confirmed on Saturday, um, and I had this one opinion piece from The Guardian suggested by Lupinit in the Discord. Great, great former co-host of the show, I guess. Hopefully, he'll have some more stuff coming up for us to watch with him. But he suggested this article from the Guardian, and it's an opinion piece written by Jessa Crispin. The title of this is "Women Aren't United Against Kavanaugh. That's a Dangerous Myth." Women aren't a singular demographic. There are myriad differences between us, and ignoring that is harmful for our politics. After all was said and done in the Senate hearings for U.S. Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, before the vote decided the fate of Roe v. Wade and many other progressive agendas, my friends kept putting their faith in female senators. Yes, the Republicans control the Senate, and this is Trump's nominee, but they have 6 women serving as senators, and how could any woman not be moved by the testimony of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford? How could the senators not feel a stronger solidarity with their gender than their party? Surely they will keep his appointment from happening. My friends were not alone. In the lead up to the vote, Vox.com was one of many outlets to breathlessly report on swing vote Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins' history of maverick behavior, calling her a progressive icon. Collins cares deeply about women, they reported a colleague saying, and when she inevitably chose to confirm Kavanaugh and vote in line with her Republican brethren, women expressed shock and disappointment. A New York Times op ed called her a gender traitor. New York Magazine accused her of betraying women. This vocal disappointment is a little surprising, as polls were saying all along that support for Kavanaugh was split among party and not gender lines. Even before the accusations surfaced, Democrats were positioning Kavanaugh as the anti-woman nominee because of his anti-choice record and association with Trump, despite him having the support of the majority of Republican women. The hearings about the sexual assault allegations did not cause a mass gender-based defection, as most of the Republican women polled stayed steadfast in their support. Collins and the other 4 Republican women senators who voted to confirm him were probably doing what they thought the majority of their supporters, including uh, of their supporters wanted the majority of their supporters wanted them to do, and there's no reason to think that might not be true. In fact, the idea that women will somehow ultimately vote for what is best for women, as if there is a set of positions on specific issues that will improve the lives of all women, has proven false repeatedly, and yet the idea refuses to die. The rhetoric around Collins echoed the rhetoric around women voters after the revelation of Trump's Access Hollywood video. Surely women could not vote for such a man, and yet he won 41% of women's votes. Allegations of pederasty and predatory behavior with teenage girls did not prevent Roy Moore from receiving the majority of white women's votes in the Alabama Senate election. And now Me Too is actively being used in women's campaign ads, with some candidates spending more time relaying their personal stories than their political positions, hoping that will capture votes. Many women voters seem turned off by the idea of claiming victimhood through gender. One woman explaining to New York Magazine why she voted for Trump, even after the grab them by the pussy audio was released, said, "I like getting groped. When a guy gropes me, I get groping on them. I grope them back." After Senator Al Franken was accused of harassment and it was seemingly forced out of Congress by some of his women colleagues, female constituents were polled as supporting Franken in higher numbers than their male counterparts. The senator who led the charge against Franken, Democrat Kristen Gillibrand, has seen her approval ratings drop ever since. Believing then that women are a singular demographic with shared experiences and shared interpretations of those experiences, shared values and priorities, and a shared vision for the world is becoming increasingly dangerous. Not all women were against Kavanaugh. That's because not all women line up with the vision of how a certain segment of centrist to liberal women commentators want other women to be: progressive, idealistic, fair-minded. Not all women support abortion rights or gay and trans rights or believe that Black Lives Matter. A large number of Republican women want a pro-life, pro-Wall Street, pro-Christian white men on the Supreme Court, nor is this a problem merely with white women. Women, like men, tend to vote in their personal interest, and what that is will vary due to a more complex array of factors than just gender or race. Class and marital status appear to matter just as much. We need to stop classifying political activity as bad for women or good for women, and instead allow for the complexity of thought and belief in the conversation about policy and legislation. And we should stop trying to lump all women together when we mean a specific section of women, and stop speaking on behalf of women who clearly want nothing to do with us. Gender is not an ideology, and it is arrogance to believe Republican women are simply deluded or brainwashed by men and incapable of thinking for themselves. And if we do want to persuade them to a less conservative position, calling them traitors or assuming we know what they are thinking, and we clearly do not, will not help our cause. We live in increasingly partisan times, but that is not going to be overcome by blindly insisting all women belong on the same side. And that was written by Jessa Crispin. Again, I think that's a good, a really interesting view, and it definitely shows what a lot of people have been trying to say to a lot of this subsection of liberal women, center liberal women, is that, not everyone agrees with you on everything. Not everyone is a Democrat, and not everyone wants, Roe versus Wade to stay enshrined in law. I mean, obviously, there's plenty who either wouldn't mind or want Roe v. Wade to be overturned. So, I mean, liberals always just play this card of like, be afraid of any Republican nominee to the Supreme Court because they're probably going to be this, conservative who's going to overturn Roe versus Wade and all these other things and this and that. And that seems to be their only, like they're kind of a one-trick pony now. That's all they have to say every time there's an election. Uh, Even if their supposed Democrat or liberal person in the White House or Senate or whatever is not even fulfilling other promises they made to liberals. They end up just using the fear factor and saying, well, if you don't support the liberal side, if you don't, support whoever is in Team Democrat, you're going to end up with a horrible Republican who will undo everything you hold dear. And that's kind of the tack they've taken in the past several years, if not decades. It feels like it's intensified over just the past decade or so, just using the Roe versus Wade card all the time. And maybe it goes back even farther. I guess I wouldn't know specifically. That would be before my time, but yeah, I mean, as far as that all goes, it is ridiculous to assume everyone will vote the same just because of their gender or whatever. It's a group you belong to. It's not an ideology. So, as the person said in that opinion piece, you know, they need to try and be more understanding, and instead of just calling people gender traitors, I mean, that's just ridiculous and unhelpful. And I don't really know how anyone on the liberal side thinks that would be of help to them in any sense. How they think they're gonna win over voters to their side by behaving that way and just calling people names. So yeah, that's the whole Kavanaugh deal, and we'll have to see what's gonna happen going forward. I'm sure there'll probably be a lot of protesting for now, and a lot of complaining and freaking out by the Democratic side, and but eventually it'll blow over and they'll find something new to complain about probably, since they've lost. So the next article also suggested by Loop in it. This is from the New York Times. Tech workers now want to know, what are we building this for? By Kate Conger and Cade Metz. San Francisco. Jack Paulson, a Google research scientist, recently became alarmed by reports that the company was developing a search engine for China that would censor content on behalf of the government. While Dr. Paulson works on search technologies, he had no knowledge of the product, which was codenamed Dragonfly. So, in a meeting last month with Jeff Dean, the company's head of artificial intelligence, Dr. Paulson asked if Google planned to move ahead with the product and if his work would contribute to censorship and surveillance in China. According to Dr. Paulson, Mr. Dean said that Google complied with surveillance requests from the federal government and asked rhetorically if the company should leave the United States market in protest. Mr. Dean also shared a draft of a company email that read, "We won't and shouldn't provide 100% transparency to every Googler, to respect our commitments to customer confidentiality and giving our product teams the freedom to innovate." The next day, Dr. Paulson quit the company. Mr. Dean did not respond to a request for comment and declined to comment. Across the technology industry, rank and file employees are now demanding greater insight into how their companies are deploying the technology that they built at Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Salesforce, as well as at tech startups. Engineers and technologists are increasingly asking whether the products they are working on are being used for surveillance in places like China or for military projects in the United States or elsewhere. That's a change from the past when Silicon Valley workers typically developed products with little questioning about the social costs. It is also a sign of how some tech companies, which grew by serving consumers and businesses, are expanding more into government work. And the shift coincides with concerns in Silicon Valley about the Trump administration's policies and the larger role of technology in government. You can think you're building technology for one purpose, and then you find out it's really twisted, said Laura Nolan, 38, a senior software engineer who resigned from Google in June over the company's involvement in Project Maven, an effort to build artificial intelligence for the Department of Defense that could be used to target drone strikes. All of this has led to growing tensions between tech employees and managers. In recent months, workers at Google, Microsoft, and Amazon have signed petitions and protested to executives over how some of the technology they helped create is being used. At smaller companies, engineers have begun asking more questions about ethics. And the change is likely to last. Some engineering students have said they are demanding more answers and are asking similar questions even before they move into the workforce. What people are looking for, not just employees, they are looking for some clarity, said Frank Shaw, a Microsoft spokesman. Are there principles that get applied, even if you don't agree with the decision that gets made? If you understand the thinking behind it, it helps a lot. Amazon did not respond to requests for comment. The lack of information about what tech employees are working on was recently evident at Clarify, an artificial intelligence startup in New York City. Last year, a small team of Clarify engineers began working on a project inside a private room at its downtown New York office, said three people with knowledge of the matter who spoke on the condition that they not be identified for fear of retaliation. Paper covered the windows, and employees called the room the Chamber of Secrets in a sly reference to the second Harry Potter novel. Even the 8 engineers and researchers working inside the room did not entirely realize the nature of the project, people said. When employees asked about the project in meetings, Clarify's chief executive, Matt Zeeler, said it was a government project related to analytics or surveillance and would save lives, according to the people. After employees read documents posted to Clarify's internal systems, it became clear that the company had won a contract for Project Maven and that workers were creating something for the Defense Department. The people said one engineer quit the project immediately after a meeting with the Defense Department where killing was discussed in frank terms, they said. A Clarify spokesman said that at the very beginning of the project, the company sat down with those chosen for it to brief them on the nature of the work, and one employee quit the project then. Every member of Clarify's Project Maven team agreed to work on the project, and the two people who chose not to participate were assigned to different efforts across the company, the spokesman said. Dr. Paulson, whose work involved incorporating a variety of languages into Google search, said he did not initially think his research could be involved in Dragonfly until he noticed Chinese had been added to a list of languages for his project. Most people don't know the holistic scope of what they're building, said Dr. Paulson, 32, who worked at Google for over 2 years. You don't have knowledge of where it's going unless you're sufficiently senior. The difficulties of knowing what companies are doing with technologies is compounded because engineers at large tech companies often build infrastructure like algorithms, databases, and even hardware that underpins almost every product a company offers. At Google, for example, a storage system called Colossus is used by Google Search, Google Maps, and Gmail. It would be very difficult for most engineers in Google to be sure that their work wouldn't contribute to these projects in some way, said Ms. Nolan, who helped to keep Google's systems running online smoothly. My personal feeling was that if the organization is doing something I find ethically unacceptable, then I was contributing to it. Yet executives at tech companies have claimed that complete transparency is not possible. We've always had confidential projects as a company. I think what happened when the company was smaller, you had a higher chance of knowing about it. Sundar Pichai, Google's chief executive, said at a staff meeting in August, according to a transcript provided to the New York Times. I think there are a lot of times when people are in exploratory stages where teams are debating and doing things, so sometimes being fully transparent at that stage can cause issues. Some Such policies have rippled beyond tech companies. In June, more than 100 students at Stanford, MIT, and other top colleges signed a pledge saying they would turn down job interviews with Google unless the company dropped its Project Maven contract. Google said that month that it would not renew the contract once it expired. We are students opposed to the weaponization of technology by companies like Google and Microsoft. The pledge stated, "Our dream is to be a positive force in the world. We refuse to be complicit in this gross misuse of power." Alex Ahmed, a doctoral candidate in computer science at Northeastern University in Boston, said she organized a student discussion on campus this month to debate whether they should work for tech companies that made decisions they believed to be unethical. "We're not given an ethics course, we're not given a political education," Miss Ahmed, 29, said. "It's impossible for us to do this unless we create the conversations for ourselves." Over the summer, she said, students at Northeastern also protested the school's multi-million-dollar research contract with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, under which it would provide research on technology exports to the agency. A Northeastern spokeswoman did not respond to a request for comment. So, yeah, that's the main gist of the article, talking about something I've followed for a little while, and I'm sure has been mentioned at least a couple times on the show. Some of these people working at Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and others coming out and saying that they're not happy with some of the policies of how Google and other companies choose to participate in these government contracts, and a lot of their employees upset that they're not given more transparency on what it is the company plans to do for the government, because they frankly don't want to be part of anything that they find unethical. And as is said, it seems like that's really kind of obfuscated in a lot of cases. And the excuse given by one of the companies there in the article said that, well, sometimes we're just throwing ideas around and we don't know, and so it's not necessarily helpful to have complete transparency, and that's up to them. As a company, if they yeah, as it's stated in the article, that now that the companies have gotten bigger, they don't have as much transparency, and the people who work there aren't as likely to know what it is that's going on behind the scenes in the negotiations for government contracts and all of that type of stuff. Especially the people who are just at the lower levels, kind of just doing their job day to day. They're not really kept in the loop on, if what they're doing is being used for surveillance or for targeting, for drones and all of that. But I'm definitely encouraged by seeing that there are a few people at least who are concerned about it, because that's something I've thought about for a long time, is like just knowing how, just in the past decade even, how these companies have just exploded onto the scene and taken over so much of our lives in every aspect, and steered people into certain ways of living and thinking now. Um, I think it's good to know that there are some people who are taking a step back and wondering, like, is what I'm doing a really good thing in the end? Am I contributing to something that's in the end dystopic or something like that? But in any case, uh, sorry about that noise. There's people outside, stupid as hell. Anyway, but yeah, so yeah, I can only hope more people will come to their senses, because especially with what was mentioned in the article about students at some of the colleges, some of these elite colleges, signing a statement saying that they want to know because they don't want to go to work for a company if it's doing evil shit. Basically, they don't they if they feel like they want to contribute to good in the world. I mean, they're not. It's good that they have the foresight to know that they're not contributing to positive things in the world if they're going to end up working for a company like Google that's just going to use their talents to create weapons, um, to aid weapons of war or create them, or to surveil people, especially even people within their own country. That's I think it is important for people to take a step back and have that ethical discussion because just these tech things don't all this technology doesn't exist in a vacuum, and I think a lot of people in the tech world sometimes can forget that because they're so interested in just the technology itself, and sometimes they're not even really paying attention to the moral implications of what they're doing. And in my opinion, I think that is very scary to me to think that somebody could just not care, and just feel like they're exercising their talent in coding and computers and whatnot, and that they'll be ending up feeding into a really horrible monolith, and that's potentially um, taking away what's left of our freedom and independence, and also potentially aiding in military actions, which is a whole other can of worms of horrible things that are being done to people across the world. So that article is pretty encouraging, and it's a surprise coming from the New York Times that I'd find anything of any kind of value from them. But broken clock is right twice a day, apparently. So. Alright, this next article comes from gatewaypundit.com. Confirmed hack reporter Molly McHugh, who pens hit pieces on Gateway Pundit and conservative activists, is exposed as a paid foreign agent Podesta operative. And this article is by Jacob Wall. Molly McHugh, a far-left Russiagate conspiracy theorist who has written multiple hit pieces against the Gateway Pundit, Cassandra Fairbanks, Jack Posobiec, Mike Cernovich, and other conservatives, is a registered agent of the Georgian government operating inside the United States. According to Foreign Agents Registration Act filings, Molly McHugh has acted inside the United States on behalf of the anti-Russian Georgian government under the guise of a consulting company known as Fianna Industries, or Fianna Strategies LLC. Recently, McHugh described several conservative commentators and indeed this website as information terrorists. McHugh previously worked for the now defunct Podesta Group, whose website described her as McHugh previously worked for the now defunct Podesta Group, whose website described her as educated at the London School of Economics, fluent in 3 languages, familiar with 4 continents, and experienced with think tanks, non-governmental organizations, Congress, and the executive branch. Molly McHugh bolsters the Podesta Group's growing international practice. Molly is instrumental in strategic planning, government relations, and messaging initiatives for foreign governments and embassies, multinational corporations, and nonprofit organizations. She takes special pride in having helped emerging democratic countries conduct free and fair elections. Early in her career, Molly worked at the American Enterprise Institute, where she directed research on foreign policy and defense, served as project director for the Middle East, and managed NGO Watch, Honing skills that she now puts to use for Podesta Group clients, Molly targeted research to public policymakers in the White House, on Capitol Hill, and in the Senate Department and Pentagon, as well as to the news media and other opinion leaders. An insatiable curiosity about the world has taken Molly across the globe. She has worked in West Africa, Southern Africa, North Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, Russia, and the Caucasus. Educated at Stanford University and the London School of Economics, she has a master's degree in Russian and post-Soviet studies, plus a strong background in the biological sciences. She is fluent in French and Russian, but also deeply rooted in the American heartland, having grown up in Idaho and lived in Ohio. McHugh has all the markers of an information warfare operative, but Politico and Wired, two of the most prominent sites that she writes for, fail to disclose her foreign agent status in their bios about her. In 2014, McHugh signed a service agreement with Mikhail Saakashvili and his United National Movement Party and the Liberal Democratic Party of Moldova. In June of this year, Saakashvili was convicted of abuse of power and sentenced to 6 years in prison. Let's see. McHugh's activities in Eastern Europe during her work for the Podesta Group are now being investigated by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. And so this article gives copies of some of these documents that show her as being registered as a foreign agent. So I'll have that link in the description if you want to check that out. The link will be up following the show sometime today. So yeah, I mean, as far as that story goes, it's not surprising, as it said, like even the biography given of her by the sites she wrote for is pretty classic, propaganda artist for the U.S. government type stuff, working for so-called, NGOs and being a cover for spreading U.S. government propaganda around the world under the guise of building democracy, right? That's what they always say, building democracy, and that's what the American Enterprise Institute is known for. It's basically like this neocon type organization, a think tank where they promote wars constantly all over the world in the name of building democracy. But we know how that ends already, not well, except for the military contractors. Alright, the next story. This next story comes citizens to get flu shot after admitting the last vaccine was only 36% effective. The CDC has admitted that last year's vaccine was only 36% effective at battling one of the worst flu seasons in years. This is written by Rachel Blevins. As Americans prepare for another flu season, the question of whether to get this year's flu shot hangs in the air for many, and the dismal success rate of last year's vaccine could serve as a major deciding factor. The United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released a report earlier this year which revealed that when looking at the flu vaccine given to patients between November 2017 and February 2018, the vaccine was only effective about 36% of the time. Each strain of influenza responded differently to the vaccine, and the CDC report noted that one of the most predominant viruses, H3N2 vaccine effectiveness rate. When combating H3N2, last year's vaccine was only effective 25% of the time. This was actually higher in the United States than it was in Canada and Australia, where the vaccine's effectiveness in combating H3N2 was only around 10%. The vaccine did lead to higher success rates with less dangerous strands such as H1N1, where it was 67% effective, and influenza B, where it was 42% effective. While the low rates of vaccine effectiveness have led to criticism of the CDC, Time noted that the agency has attempted to defend the drug by insisting that it is still higher than past years where the rate of effectiveness was as low as 20%. 36% effectiveness may not seem very impressive, but the CDC emphasizes in the report that even small increases in immunity can have a large impact on public health. CDC data has shown that even in 2014-2015, a year when vaccine effectiveness didn't even hit 20%, immunizations prevented as many as 144,000 flu-related hospitalizations and 4,000 deaths, plus many people who get the shot but who still end up getting sick tend to have less severe illnesses than unvaccinated people. The all-around low rate of vaccine effectiveness is also notable because a recent report from the CDC admitted that more than 80,000 people died from the flu last year, and at least 180 of them were children. The report noted that influenza-like illnesses peaked at 7.5%, which was the highest percentage since 2009, when influenza-like illnesses peaked at 7.7%. However, even with the infamous swine flu wreaking havoc in 2009, it was estimated that around 12,000 people died that year. With the 2017-2018 flu season standing as one of the worst in years, parents also raised concerns about the medication that was prescribed to their children when they did get the flu. As the Free Thought Project reported in February, while oseltamivir, the antiviral medication marketed as Tamiflu, is typically prescribed to patients with early symptoms of the flu, some of the drug's users have had rare side effects of sudden confusion, delirium, hallucinations, unusual behavior, or self-injury. Adding to the ominous nature of these side effects is the fact that these symptoms have occurred most often in children. Last month, 16-year-old Charlie Harper was given Tamiflu, the entirely normal boy, then took his own life hours later. Had I known this was an issue, I would have never given it to him, remarked Jackie Ray, Harp's aunt and guardian. Parents of a 6-year-old little girl gave their daughter Tamiflu and she began hallucinating, ran away, and then tried to kill herself by jumping out of a window. She was about to jump out the window when my wife came up and grabbed her, recalled the girl's father, who wanted to stay anonymous. As the 2018-2019 flu season begins, the best thing parents and individuals can do is to research the side effects and the ingredients included in the vaccines or medications they are taking so that they can be fully educated on what they can and should expect and what treatment they should seek if the worst case scenario occurs. So again, the CDC pushing flu shots, and I think it's a good idea for people to research this further. There's a lot of sources out there. I'm not going to claim to be any kind of expert, but I'll just say that personally, I don't take flu shots. I haven't gotten a flu shot in probably almost 15 years at this point. I don't see the point. I don't think it's really that effective for most people. I think it's just a way for these companies to make money and for the government to get people conditioned into blindly doing what they're told by the medical establishment. And and I think a lot of the claims the CDC makes there have been under scrutiny by a lot of people, and you can go look for yourself at different sources. I know for sure that when I talk to people who do get the flu shot, I hear people parrot those same talking points where they say, "Well, even if I did get the flu anyway, my doctor tells me it made the flu less severe by getting the flu shot," which I don't really buy that, but It's up to you. It's up to every person if they want to get that or not or whatever. And that whole thing about Tamiflu, I actually haven't heard that specifically before. That it had such bizarre side effects, including potentially trying to kill yourself, as a couple of kids apparently did. That's pretty disturbing. Yeah, I mean that would seem to be more dangerous than getting the flu, as many people get every year. You know, unless they're in a really fragile state. I mean, plenty of people get flus all the time and recover. Um, it's not. I don't know that. Like for myself, yeah, I wouldn't see getting a flu shot. Um, or getting this medication that has possible side effects of self harm and all this other crazy shit. I wouldn't really see that as worth it in treating the flu. I mean, I got sick last, winter season a couple times and just pretty much wrote it out and I haven't really found medications to be helpful anyway in the past. So, um, that's just a daily dose of your seasonal pushing of vaccination. And I just encourage everyone to do their own research and keep an open mind about these things. Because the CDC is, I don't believe the CDC has the best interests of people in mind, and just another very corrupt government agency. All right. The next article I have here is from Reason.com, and I thought this was a pretty interesting article. This came out a few days ago, last week, but it's pretty interesting. Written by Balin Lenikin. Despite advocates' wishes, parents still buying fast food for kids. A new report from the Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity, released last month, claims that parents are buying more fast food for their kids than ever before. Worse still, say the study's authors, parents are turning a blind eye to so-called healthier choices that are now available at many of those fast food outlets and sticking with tried and true junk food choices. The study is based on a survey of roughly 800 parents with one or more children aged 2 to 11. It reveals some surprising findings. For example, it found at least 1 in 3 parents buy food for their kids at Burger King, KFC, McDonald's, or Subway at least once each week. It also found that more than 90% of parents bought their kids a meal at one of those 4 restaurants during the past week, and it found that just 5% of parents never buy their kids food from McDonald's. Jennifer Harris, Director of Marketing Initiatives with the Rudd Center, told CBS News that fast food companies have come under a lot of pressure from public health advocates to improve the nutrition quality of their products, especially kids' meals, and that they have responded by offering healthier side options in kids' meals. But the study authors also suggest the promise of these healthier options is helping lure parents into restaurants only for them to continue to choose less healthy options once there. For years, advocates have urged fast food restaurants to carry healthier options, particularly in kids' meals. For example, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which founded the new Rudd Center study, urged fast food companies in a 2013 study of its own to increase the proportion of lower calorie, healthier items on their menus and make them available at a reasonable price. It's always nice when a restaurant offers a few things on their menu that aren't fried, the Rudd Center's own Marlene Schwartz told the Connecticut Post in 2011. Schwartz said it's uncertain that kids will pick the healthy items as long as the unhealthy items are still there, the paper also noted. Fast food consumption by children is up despite the aforementioned moves by many fast food restaurants in recent years to offer putatively healthier choices for kids. Notably, many of these same advocates have also supported legislative efforts to crack down on fast food choices available to parents buying meals for kids. It appears most of these efforts have failed or backfired and have given rise to their share of unintended consequences. Restaurant menu labeling was supposed to drive consumers, parents especially, to make healthier choices in fast food restaurants. It hasn't, just the opposite. Los Angeles famously and really disastrously banned new fast food restaurants in South Los Angeles. San Francisco's Happy Meal ban was an immediate bust as McDonald's simply offered their Happy Meal toys for a small additional price. Others have followed. One of the interesting points I noted in the new report, for example, is that Burger King now offers a dessert in place of a kids' meal toy. What's that? Government advocates offering free toys with a high calorie kids' meal purchase is bad? Fine, we'll just give them some more calories instead. Delicious. Let's see. Austin considered banning fast food restaurants near places where kids congregate. And after researchers claimed fast food logos brainwash kids, some called for such marketing to be banned forthwith. The Rudd study embraces these sorts of government interventions. For example, it suggests fast food restaurants should make healthier choices the default and endorses government measures such as those in places like Baltimore that mandate the practice. I surmise these laws will continue not to achieve their goals. Nevertheless, fast food restaurants are still restauranting, responding to evolving consumer demands by implementing changes of their own, including some that kids' meals critics will cheer. For example, McDonald's announced earlier this year that it was making changes to its Happy Meals that will remove calories, sodium, and sugar from the kids' menu items. So that story was from Reason.com again, and it basically just mentions the backlash of some of these attempts to use government to force people to eat healthier, and unsurprisingly, it's not working, and in some cases, it's kind of having an opposite effect, especially where it says that uh, people they see that there's new healthier options advertised, but when they get to the fast food place, they end up not choosing them, and that I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, frankly, like when I was growing up, when we went to a fast food place, that was kind of a celebration type thing. It wasn't something I grew up, going to all the time. I definitely didn't go to fast food restaurants very often at all, and so for me, it was like a treat. And when you're, going to a place to treat yourself, you're not really as inclined to want to try something to eat something healthy again. At least, in my case, I was lucky enough to have a good home life where I had a parent who would make healthy food for me every day. Whereas I know a lot of kids don't have that, and unfortunately, if they grow up eating just fast food all the time, I mean, they're obviously going to be not very healthy. Um, but using the government to try and force fast food places to have healthier food isn't going to change that. That has to come from society. That's not something that can be forced upon people just like anything else. I mean, you can't force people to be moral, to adhere to whatever you think is moral or right, and you can't force people to eat healthily or to cook nutritious food for their kids on a regular basis instead of taking them to a fast food restaurant. Um, That's just not something that can be done through legislation. And so all these organizations and people who try to do that are just going to be disappointed every time. And it's basically a business in itself, just all of these lobbyists trying to get one thing done or another thing done. I mean, their livelihood is based on just trying to implement new nanny state type laws in different cities around the country. Um, they don't. I don't think they really care if it works or not. They make money off of just sitting around and complaining and scolding companies. That don't force anyone to eat their food. And like I said, I mean, if you want people to eat more healthy, that has to come from the community. It has to come from within people's communities and their own family. It's not going to be something that the government can come in and like ban unhealthy food and whatnot. Um, that will change anything. So, unsurprising, but what are you going to do? I don't expect these people to give up, unfortunately. But we'll just have to see what their next what ridiculous laws they try to pass next. Apparently, a couple of these cities have uh, unilaterally tried to ban certain types of meals and food and whatnot, and it sounds like it's not working well. So, in any case, um, a couple housekeeping notes with the show. I'm a cryptic cynic in the Discord chat. I'm the only host for the morning right now, but we are looking for other people if anyone's available and interested in uh, doing this morning show. Um, Let us know in the Discord or in the comments or somewhere. Get a hold of us. We'd definitely love to have one or more other hosts for the show, especially for the morning slot. We may have other people um, doing an afternoon version of the show later on, but right now it would be good to have more hosts in the morning. That would be cool. So if you're interested in that, let one of us know in the Discord in the comments or somewhere else. Um, until then, I'll continue bringing you the negative news of the morning with Bad Morning News. And so thanks again for tuning in. Thanks to Brave Browser for sponsoring the show. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for today. This has been Bad Morning News, episode 56. Remember to screw the state and fuck the system. Have a bad morning, everyone.